you've asked me to be part of this event today, because I have set myself a challenge, and you are free to call me on this if I don't meet it, because very often the kind of language that you hear around arts practice research is alternative, non-traditional, not normative, and I use this language myself a lot as well. And I think in some ways it puts us in a separate category to traditional research outputs. So we have books, and we have monographs, and we have journal articles, and I think as a spectrum of outputs that many of us are involved in, because I think most of us here in the room are artists and scholars. We're performers, we're singers, we're dancers, we're musicians, we're visual artists, and our various outputs span that full spectrum. And there's nothing alternative about a dancer dancing, except when they do it in the university. So I think though all of those words have become kind of weighted in this discourse, so I'm going to try not to use them. I'm going to try to talk about what we do as just another kind of output. Niamh asked me to talk about a particular project that I've been involved in, which was the recording of this CD. And I suppose it's of interest possibly to yourselves in a number of ways. One is because it came out of a research collective. So it's a collective that's made up of faculty members, of supervisors, and PhD students. And we draw on this as a common pool for our various research outputs. The other is that I suppose the kind of outputs of a group like this include a very, very wide span from live performance to recorded performance to academic research. I was about to say traditional, to academic outputs like books or articles. So I'm going to talk about a few of those, but maybe just to tell you the origins of this group. In 2009, here at the Irish World Academy, we started the Arts Practice PhD. So this was a second track in doctoral research that allowed professional artists to look at their own arts practice as part of their research. Now, one of the areas that I'm very interested in is ensemble singing. What happens when groups of people sing together? Because lots of really interesting things happen. In my own work, I very often look at that within ritual contexts. So questions of belonging, who gets included, who gets excluded, are there different models that allow us to feel a sense of belonging through performance, and are there other models that actually reinforce exclusion? So that was a question that I was really interested in. Before this Arts Practice PhD started, I'd been the course director here for about 10 years of a master's program in ritual chant and song. So one of the core repertoires that we looked in there was Latin medieval chant. So as this PhD was starting, I knew that I was going to have a number of students who were coming out of that MA program and who were really interested in working with medieval chant and working with the voice. And so one of the ideas we had is that, what if we set up a collective? If we set up a space within the program for people who were interested in doing this kind of research, that they could pull and drag on that. And I was actually quite inspired by a student group that had started in the MA program by a student called Olivia Cantoral, hence our name, which is a kind of people always think it's related to singing, so it's our kind of little internal joke about where the title came from. But this is one of our inaugural performances. This was in New York City, and two of the members of that ensemble were already PhD students here with us. Eri Hirabayashi, who was doing some work on a Japanese ritual tradition called the Mikomai. Sharon Lyons, who was in the first cohort of Arts Practice PhDs. She's a professional singer. She works in the Pro Cathedral in Dublin as a liturgical cantor. You will see some other people in the audience who will eventually become PhD students, but we're part of this. So in our very first performance, what's interesting, I think, is the two PhD students in the ensemble. One of them was doing a text-based dissertation, and one of them was doing a practice-based PhD. The girl, Eri, who was doing the text-based PhD, was a very, very fine singer. And Sharon, who was doing the arts practice PhD, was a very fine scholar. So already we begin to see the connection between these two worlds. By the second year, we had two more PhD students, Sydney Friedman and Olivia Cantoral, as I mentioned. So now we have 4 PhD students beginning to move around this collective. And because of that critical mass of specialist researchers, there were a whole number of things that we could do collectively that we couldn't necessarily do on our own. So one of the things that we felt very passionately about is that there were many, many manuscripts in Ireland that had repertoire about the Irish saints that were never recorded, and that nobody was singing them, that there was no scholarly access to them because there were no microfilms or facsimiles of them. So we started going around the libraries to collect these. And within our group, we had a paleographer, we had a Latinist, and I'll just give you a small example. This is a manuscript in the manuscript collection in TCD, in Trinity College Dublin. It's TCD 80, and this has annotated offices to the Irish saints, particularly to Bridget and Patrick. This is a little excerpt from one of the offices to Bridget. So within our group, we had people who were able to read the various hands in the manuscript, who could decipher the Latin for us, who could help us create editions out of this that ultimately we could sing from. So I'm just going to play you a small excerpt of that, and then we can talk a little bit about how that went from performance to recording. So this is a chant. I just put the translation up here for you. This is a chant to Bridget. It's a gorgeous chant, actually, because it's all the, within medieval Irish spirituality, one of the highest honours that you could give to a female saint was to say that they were equivalent to Mary, equivalent to the Mother of God. So in this chant, all the presbyters, all the bishops are getting together and say, we declare Bridget to be the new Mary. And so it's a gorgeous piece. Point of being able to perform that piece, there was a whole layer of scholarship in behind that, in sourcing the material, deciphering the material, creating editions of the material. I should say that the artistic director of our group is a professional early music singer, a Paris-based singer called Katrina Sargent, and you can hear the style of our singing is very influenced by that French early music way of interpreting chant, and I think you can hear that throughout the recording. Over about 2 years, with this collective pool of PhD students and faculty, we developed enough repertoire to begin to move towards a recording. And I suppose the core of what I'm talking about today is how do you move from having a set of material to actually putting it out as a research output. And I think probably a lot of performers would agree that the first thing that you have to do is to embed the repertoire in the ensemble. And very often you do that by live performance. So we engaged in a series of concerts over about 1.5 years. The first of these was in the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris. I had been on sabbatical at the University of Notre Dame in 2012, and the University of Notre Dame runs an Irish Studies seminar in Ireland every year. But for the first time in 2013, they decided to have it at the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris. And because of our connection with Paris through Katrine and through working at the Irish Cultural Centre, they invited us to sing at the opening event. So that was the first time that we did a live performance of this particular repertoire. In the following year, we were invited to we did a small North American tour, particularly of kind of university venues. And again, each of these performances, I think this is worth saying, a performance itself is a research output. So all of that work, all the work that goes in behind that, creates the live event. And any of you that are involved in arts practice research knows that there's a very big debate around this issue of liveness. And something that I think that's quite distinctive that performing artists bring to this world of research is the ephemeral nature of performance. When you create something live, you create a particular kind of research output that is not always easily measurable within the traditions of academia. So there's a lot of discussion around how this kind of work constitutes research. But I think for the performer, it's very evident to us that there's a particular kind of research output that comes out of the live experience. And I think for anybody who's interested in doing recording, whether that's audio-visual or audio recording like we did, embedding that material through the live performance is critical. So there's a kind of a spectrum of outputs that come from it, starting with live performance, I think, and then very often moving towards some kind of capture of that. Now, between the live performance and the recorded capture, there's a whole terrain of challenge for the arts practice researcher. A very critical challenge is funding. Where does the money come? Because to produce an arts practice research output in an archivable form, so as an audio-visual recording, for example, very often costs a lot of money. And again, it's not always easily self-evident where one goes to for that funding. Sometimes the Arts Council, we had a meeting for the last 2 hours with various Irish universities looking at this issue. Sometimes the Arts Council will say, because it's research, you should look to the Research Council. And sometimes the Research Council will say, because it's an artistic output, you should talk to the Arts Council. So there are still these institutional challenges as to where the funding can come from to do this kind of work. And very often it seems to me what the arts practice researcher has to do is to kind of morph themselves into the identity that's acceptable to that particular funder. In our case, we were quite lucky because Notre Dame picked up the live performance and agreed to fund the recording for us. The other important thing for a lot of this kind of work is location. Where do you do it? We decided to do the recording in this very beautiful abbey called Ballintubber Abbey, which for many reasons met our needs. I'll show you the inside of it. So the acoustic is something, of course, that's really, really important for a group like ourselves. So picking the right place to do the recording, picking a place that inspires you, that you can spend 4 or 5 days together collectively doing this kind of work is very important. As researchers, it was also terribly important for us to document the process of the recording. So we invited up a professional photographer, we did audiovisual recordings of the entire process. You can see there was a very natural kind of upstairs space here, which allowed us to do recording. Kieran Lynch was our sound engineer. Micheál Sullivan produced the album. Again, having somebody who is familiar with the kind of music that you do. Micheál had produced 3 albums already with liturgical choirs, had a sense of the importance of the acoustic. Kieran Lynch had a track record with doing acoustic recording and working in non-studio spaces, which was really important to us as well. The sensitivity around things like microphones, where you put these where you don't want them, if you want to get a particular kind of ensemble palette, and also using the opportunity not just to record for research but to record for publicity purposes is really important for performance groups as well. Out of this work, I just thought I might make a list of all the PhDs that came out of this work that we've been doing over the last number of years. The first 5 PhDs, you can see a number of them are directly related to the recording. But one of the lovely things about a collective like this is that we are also available as a resource to students who are working in other areas. So I'm going to show you a very, very tiny clip, because I'm conscious of the time, of Sharon Lyons, who is a medieval singer, but for her PhD, she commissioned new composition based on medieval chant. The example I'm going to play for you is based on Chants for Bridget. And she was able to draw this ensemble to sing for her. And likewise, I'll show you one other very small example of Julie Friedman, who was interested in Georgian chant and put a collection of singers together out of this pool to work specifically in her area. The last 3 names I mentioned, Kathleen Turner, who is here with us today, Hannah Fahy and Carrie Dyke, are also all people who have sung with Cantoral. And while I think Kathleen would agree with me that the work is not directly drawing on the repertoire of Cantoral, I think for each of these PhD researchers, there's an element of singing or vocal ensemble that's a really important part of their work. And you can see that comes from community music, from vocal pedagogy, music education, to traditional singing and ethnomusicology. Can I play you just a really short sample of the two PhD projects? So this is a very short piece that was commissioned from the Irish composer Eilish Farrell. Some of you may know Eilish, and Sydney's piece, which will follow on directly, is an actual performance. These are PhD performances, a performance of Orthodox Vespers in the Icon Chapel in Glenstall Abbey as part of her PhD. I suppose really the last thing I want to say is that when you sing with your own students, it completely changes the relationship between a supervisor and a student. You know, there's a collective energy there that happens that goes beyond the cerebral and the intellectual, because you're working on something together. And that's something that I really appreciate, that the vast majority of my PhD students are people that I sing with. They're people that I make music with. So the collective nature of that, also creating a kind of a resource that people can draw on. The model that we set up, because it's a collective, none of us get paid for this. We get, if a festival asks us to perform, they pay the group, and that goes into accommodation and that. But we're a resource that people can draw on. So if somebody wants to create a professional ensemble, they can pay the singers out of that. So it's like a well that people can keep coming back to. And I suppose really the last thing I'd like to say is that this kind of research, which may be of interest to some of you, working collectively with other artist scholars to produce live performance, to produce recorded performance, can also lead to other kind of textual work. For myself, and I'll just finish by saying this, all of this work has been a huge influence on the text-based research that I do as well. So this book, Singing the Rights Belong, as I said, this core question that I have all the time, which is why do we sing together? And what do we get out of that? What happens when we sing together? A core way in which I have tried to answer that question has come out of my experience of singing with other people. And I just said I'd mention, because this is more directly related to the medieval chant that we've been singing, this is the most recent project I've been working on, which is linked to this manuscript I have a fascination with, Orchestra Lycearium, which is I first encountered through Cantoral, but looks at things like medieval understanding of territory and landscape. And for the medieval mind, the natural and the supernatural world were not separate places. They moved very easily back and forth. And what's really fascinating about music at this time is that the whole idea of rhythm began to change around early medieval understandings of time as something infinite and unchanging to something very measurable and finite. And you can feel this in the various, the change of notation, the changing understanding of rhythm that happened around this time. So I think when we engage in this kind of research, we open ourselves up to a very rich and wide possibility of different research outputs. So I hope as a model it might be useful to some of you going forward. The last thing I'll say is that if Oscar had been a woman, he could have been part of this ensemble, because he was one of my PhD students as well. But that's the only reason.
I sing alto.
Exactly. Thank you very much.